Welcome back, everyone, to a recap episode of the College Sports Hive. That is Leif Tulane, and I'm Scott Stevens. We're going to be bringing you some college football games that took place over the Thanksgiving weekend. We have 4 games to recap for you. We got Notre Dame at North Carolina, Iowa State at Texas, Oregon at Oregon State, and Northwestern at Michigan State. We're not going to bring you a recap of the Iron Bowl because Alabama won pretty handily over Auburn, and it wasn't really that competitive of a football game. Also, the preview that we gave of Colorado and USC, that game did not happen due to USC COVID issues in their camp there. So we have 2 new recaps of 2 pretty big upsets to talk about that took place throughout the course of this weekend. And then we'll get into the pick results at the end, like always. And then we'll talk about the schedule for this upcoming week for the content that we're going to be able to get for all of you moving forward. So with that being said, we'll jump right into our first recap. And that was number 2, Notre Dame, traveling to number 19, North Carolina. Notre Dame won 31-17 to remain undefeated on the season. It was very competitive throughout the first half, though, with North Carolina being able to score points and hang with this Notre Dame team. What do we see early in this one, Leaf, that led us to believe that North Carolina had a real shot here?
Yeah, they were able to move the ball, and we talked about on our show that if Notre Dame was able to score first, that this game probably wasn't going to be conducive to North Carolina. But North Carolina got a stop and then scored, and it looked really good in the first half, to the effect of being tied going into halftime, and received the ball coming out. So it looked really good. They played well. They ran the ball, threw the ball effectively, limited mistakes. Notre Dame, I thought the story was more a mix of complacency on North Carolina's part and play calling wise, as well as Notre Dame's defense played a really good second half stylistically. But North Carolina played one of the best halves of their season in the first half.
Yeah, it was interesting because it felt like they were playing very good football too, but it also felt like they were just explosive. Like I touched on early in our preview, like they have a very good offense. They're very explosive on that side of the football. They just felt free. They looked like they were playing free and football that they weren't scared of anybody that was lined up against them. They were running downfield, completing passes, running the ball on that Notre Dame defensive front. So it was very interesting to see the way that North Carolina started this game with their first 2 to 3 drives compared to the rest of the game, the rest of the 3 quarters, in which they only scored 3 points the rest of the way after the first quarter, because it was tied 14-14 at the end of that first quarter. So I think it was a big combination of what you said. Notre Dame did start buckling down a little bit on defense and stopping the run and making North Carolina one-dimensional and having to pass the ball to beat them. But also it just felt like a little bit of complacency on the North Carolina side of things, and that's not a way to beat this Notre Dame team who's able to score and play very good defense against anyone in the country.
Yeah, one thing I noticed, especially in the second half, but even in the second quarter, as you touched on, the last 3 quarters, they scored 3 points, which any team's probably going to lose a game when that happens. I thought Notre Dame did a great job with their linebackers tackling in open space, which is a lot of what North Carolina tried to do, get their running backs and playmakers in space, especially with their trio of running backs. They have a lot of explosive plays through the air, but also on the ground. And Notre Dame limited those with their athletic linebackers and made some really sure tackles in space that could have gone for big plays. So it wasn't like they didn't execute well at all. And I think they became complacent at a time. But I think there was kind of an equal measure of complacency on North Carolina's part. But I think a lot of that factored in with Notre Dame's open field tackling was exquisite in this game.
Yeah, so this is now North Carolina's 3rd loss in the season, so it's safe to say they're probably out of the race for the ACC championship game, any sort of things like that. Not to say they were really in the playoff contingent, but they were number 19 in the country, so clearly the committee saw something valuable in this team, but that is now their 3rd loss, and we'll probably see them fall, maybe even outside of the top 25 with that loss there, unfortunately for them. Let's talk about Notre Dame, though. Ian Book had another good performance, 23 of 33, 279 yards, only the 1 touchdown, but most importantly, 0 interceptions again. He's continuing to take care of the football as well as being able to push it downfield. And the amount of times that I've seen him I saw him in this game make just ridiculous plays with his legs to extend plays, and give his team a chance to win the game, and make the plays in which they needed to make that happen was really impressive to me. I think this is one of not his most impressive stat line performance, but just pure heart and pure grit. I think this was probably one of his better performances in a huge moment, because North Carolina really did come to play early in this one.
Yeah, for sure. He showed his maturity and poise in this game, where because a lot of those big scrambles or even extension of plays where he ended up finding receivers were in the first half in big moments on third downs. And I think the term game manager gets a bad connotation, and sure, it can be bad, and sometimes it proves limitations. But he's managing the game in a good sense for Notre Dame because they have such a good offensive line, such a good running game. You don't need to make mistakes. You don't need to push the ball. And he's shown in big games he's been able to do it without making those mistakes. And he's been a game manager that has explosive ability with his legs, and sometimes he can make big plays with his arms. And he's been perfect for this team, and it shows that he's been there for 4 years and learned under Deshaun Kaiser initially, and then he took over the reins, and he's made obvious strides because when earlier in his career, I think you would have seen in this type of game, he'd press and make some mistakes. And I think that's what's really elevated Notre Dame into a contender this season is the ability to both run the ball and throw the ball effectively.
You transitioned me beautifully there. Let's talk about Kyron Williams, their running back. He had 23 carries, 124 yards, and 2 touchdowns in this one. He was a massive factor. He looked very strong running the football. Pretty much whenever Notre Dame wanted to go to the run play, they got at least 5 yards and a cloud of dust in this one, just marching the ball down the field on this North Carolina defense. Let's talk about his performance and where can something like this lead this team moving forward in what they have left on their schedule.
I mean, Notre Dame always has a good run game, but I think Kyron Williams is a really good running back, and he would be good anywhere. So they can run, and they proven early in the season before Ian Book started accelerating, they ran the ball like 30 times a game, and they were able to win in kind of what a lot of people call ugly fashion, and he's able to do so. But I think that Notre Dame, with the schedule they've got up until presumably Clemson, they can just run the ship and just try to run the ball and take care of the ball and not have to take a lot of shots, and he allows them that option.
What do we think we have to see from this Notre Dame team the rest of the way to make sure that they're in a position to be able to take on this Clemson team again if that matchup presents itself in the ACC championship game, because that's going to be the biggest game of the year for in college football is if that rematch happens.
I mean, I assume that matchup will happen, and so Notre Dame really just has to win that matchup and not get beaten in beforehand against some teams that they really should beat handily. So that said, that you can't lose focus and start expecting 3 weeks ahead. You got to you got to watch film for the other teams and come in and play good games. So I think they'll be not using their whole playbook necessarily and try to have some tricks up their sleeve for Clemson. But that said, they got to take care of their business and can't look ahead.
For sure. All right, that's Notre Dame beating North Carolina in this one, 31-17, one of their toughest remaining challenges on their schedule. So the Fighting Irish are well on their way to that ACC rematch with Clemson and one of the bigger games in the landscape of college football this season. Let's move on to a ranked matchup this weekend. That was a fantastic game in the Big 12. Iowa State did all but punch their ticket to the Big 12 championship game with a win over number 17 Texas. The final was 23-20 in favor of the Cyclones. Brock Purdy and Breece Hall once again had a tremendous duo of play in the backfield there for Iowa State. What did you make of this game, and what made the difference for you in terms of Iowa State getting the win?
I thought this game was extremely competitive and very evenly played. And one big difference that stood out to me is there was 1 turnover for Texas and 0 for Iowa State. And Brock Purdy played a great game. That drive down 4 to take them down the field was amazing. And they have a nice trio, a very underrated trio of Breece Hall, Brock Purdy, and Charlie Kolar. They move the ball well. They play solid defense, and I really think they're the best team in the Big 12 right now. And I don't think they have any shot of making the college football playoff necessarily, but they're the best representative of the conference holistically. And sure, Oklahoma's starting to peak, but their defense is considerably better than that of the Sooners.
Absolutely, yeah. And let's flip the script and talk about Texas a little bit in this one. Cameron Dicker missed a 57-yard kick to tie the game, which looked good for a long portion of when that ball was in the air, just snuck left on him at the end. And Sam Ehlinger had another very good game in this one. Let's talk about Texas and where this team goes from here. This is now, I believe, their third loss in the season. That drops them behind Oklahoma and a couple other teams in the Big 12. So uphill battles for them for sure. But where do we see this Texas team going from here, and what do we make of them moving forward?
Well, I think it's really disappointing based on the team they had and Ellinger as a senior quarterback. But I think they're not really playing for anything the rest of the season. And moving on to the next season, I heard from a friend of the program, JT. If you're listening, shout out JT. He told me that he has a buddy on the team that they don't really believe in Coach Tom Herman. So I'm not sure what that says, or if that's just one person's recollection or of a whole locker room and belief of it. But that doesn't bode well in any sense. And I wonder if he'll still remain at Texas. But at such a big powerhouse program, you expect better. And some of these harsh expectations are going to cost people jobs. We talk about that about Jim Harbaugh. But Tom Herman's underwhelmed for the talent that you can get at Texas and the reputation Texas has. So I think he's on the hot seat and may well have coached one of his last games.
Yeah, it's really interesting too, because he went there and it was his dream job and all of this stuff after good years of coaching at Houston, and it was just one of those things where it's just you take on a huge profiled team like this Texas program, and there's so many expectations, and sure, you have a scheme that works at a place like Houston, but then you come into that huge of a scenario and expect that much expectation, and then you have a few years where you're trying to rebuild your program and trying to get things here or there, and then you finally get to the year that you're supposed to have it all together and you don't perform, and then everyone just shuts off on you like that. And it's very interesting to see. I do think he's a good coach, but he doesn't have seemed to be able to win the big games, which again is another issue with Jim Harbaugh there at Michigan. And it's just really interesting to sit down and look at this team and say, is Tom Herman really the right coach for this Texas team, or do they need someone who's proven themselves to be able to handle the expectations and something like that comes from coaching at a place like Texas and having all of that expectation put on them and to lead that program forward and to win? Because quite frankly, when you go to Texas, you're expected to win and win a lot of games, win the Big 12, go to the playoff, all of this good stuff. And they had a great season last year beating Utah in the Alamo Bowl and all of that stuff. But then again, you had your guy, Sam Ehlinger is a senior. We touched on that. He's going to go probably to the NFL draft in this loaded potential draft class of quarterbacks. Where do we see Sam Ehlinger fall into this scheme of things here with these studs that are potentially going to the NFL draft this year?
I think he had a bit of a down season compared to some of the expectations that he had coming in, but that doesn't mean he was bad at all. I think that because of the quarterback class being how good it is, he honestly could benefit from taking the extra eligibility coronavirus presents and go into a weaker quarterback class. But I don't know if he will. I think he's probably a mid-round quarterback in the draft, but he very well could fit the modern NFL right now with mobility and arm strength coming at a premium, and that's what he has. And he's got really these leadership intangibles that I really think are impressive. And I felt bad for him and even Coach Herman, because in this game they had a very, very good chance of winning this game. And I mean, I looked at some play-by-play, and I'm like drive-by-drive, and they were up 4 and turned the ball over on downs at the Iowa State 13 with 8 minutes left. I mean, that's unfortunate. You're trying to put the foot on the pedal and score a touchdown and go up 11 with 7 minutes left, and that's pretty much a ball game usually. But they didn't score there. Rather than taking a field goal and going up 7, which a lot of coaches may have done, and I guess Herman was playing for his job. Texas then gets the ball back with 4 minutes left, up 4 with a few minutes left, and only used 1 minute even, and punted, and not even a great punt, giving plenty of time for Brock Purdy to take his team 69 yards and 144. And then Ellinger had another opportunity to win it and took a sack on third down, making the field goal 57 yards rather than 51, or what if they had gotten incompletion. And if you get 7 yards there, 44 is extremely manageable. 57 is pretty extreme, and Dicker's a really good kicker, but I don't know. I felt like this was an anticlimactic end to Sam Ellinger's kind of Texas career. Like, it felt like it was, you have to win this game for them to have a chance. And I don't know if that makes him come back for another year or not, but he's certainly a good quarterback and deserves some recognition by fans and draft prospects.
It'll be very interesting for sure. And it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with the rest of the Big 12 this season, because we've touched on this a couple times now. It looks like their chances at a college football playoff berth are pretty much all but dead, seeing as Iowa State's their highest ranked team as of right now, and they already have 2 losses on the season so far. So it's looking bleak in terms of the Big 12 making the college football playoff. And now transitioning into our next game, it looks also almost impossible for the Pac-12 to have a playoff berth, with number 15 Oregon losing to Oregon State at Oregon State, 41-38. The Beavers were able to get it done in that rivalry game there. It was a spooky, kind of weird evening, a ton of fog that rolled into the Willamette Valley. I do know how to pronounce that word, I swear. And it was just an Oregon team that had made too many mistakes, kind of was a little bit full of themselves coming into this season, I think, a little bit. Weren't able to get it done there on the road against their in-state rival, the Beavers. What did you make of this, and what do we think about Oregon moving forward and the Pac-12 in general? I know that's a pretty loaded question, but what do you got for me?
Yeah, first things first, I think that the Beavers came out to play and kind of shocked Oregon. I mean, they had 0 turnovers, which we'll keep harping on, but that's because every game, if you have more possession, you're more likely to win. And Jamar Jefferson, running back for Oregon State, had himself a ball game. He had 29 carries, 226 yards, and 2 touchdowns. That was leading the way for 269 yards on the ground. And then the Tristan Gebbia, the quarterback for Oregon State, also had an efficient game, 23 of 37 with 263 yards, a touchdown through the air, and another touchdown rushing. And if you have that type of efficiency against what is a pretty talented defense that hasn't really shown its ability, I think that Oregon, like you said they're full of themselves. I think they lost a lot, but the hype for this program may have become, due to all those losses, unwarranted. And they hadn't, and we talked about it entering this week, that Oregon was the only shot for the Pac-12, but it looked bleak even then because they hadn't performed very well. Once we saw that they were ranked 15th, and covering the last base of that question is, I don't think USC, which is the only team that really has a chance in the Pac-12, has any chance of making it, because like Oregon, they haven't played very well. And they honestly, I thought they kind of got lucky not going to play Colorado this week, because Colorado is a tough team to play, high altitude. Actually, no, that was in the Coliseum, so that doesn't matter. But regardless, I don't think that the Pac-12 really has any hope at all unless USC gets some phenomenal luck and absolutely pummels everyone else.
Yeah, it's gonna be really interesting to see what happens moving forward with this conference because it just seems to me like they're just a step behind everyone else. Like, the quality of football for some reason just does not seem up to par with some of the other conferences that I've seen play. I know they had a difficult time without fall camp, without all of these things. The normalcy of that is very real, and I do believe that has a factor. But also, it just seems like they're just way behind the 8 ball here. And a team like Oregon is a perfect example of that, because they come into this year, yes, they lost a ton, cannot replace what opted out for their team in the secondary, 3 All-American potential players that aren't playing. But at that point in time, a program like Oregon that recruits as well as they do and has the talent level that they have in the pedigree in that program, you can't make excuses. You are the face of the Pac-12. And so at that point in time, especially with the way that they handled themselves in this game against Oregon State, they were chirpy, they were arrogant, they were a little bit chippy at certain points in time. And this game was never in like this game was never certain for Oregon to win at all. And then here comes Oregon State in the fourth quarter and just completely steals it away from you. So it was a weird end to the game, but also at the same point in time is just like the Pac-12 is just a little bit like maybe not even a little bit like far behind the competition and the other Power Five conferences. So that's a little bit concerning in terms of what's happening out west. But once again, it was a great performance from Oregon State. Jamar Jefferson, like you touched on, had a fantastic game. I just think Tyler Shuck he's just not seeming to be that guy for Oregon necessarily. He had 2 bad interceptions in this game, which really hurt Oregon down the stretch because there were turnovers that gave Oregon State the chance to go ahead and score and win this game moving forward. And then he got the ball back with like 38 seconds left and just wasn't able to do anything with it to threaten to get a game-tying field goal. But just a really interesting game here. Oregon State, a tremendous performance. What else did you make of this one here?
Yeah, I think a big thing is that the drop off from Herbert to Shuck has been huge, and I think with those expectations, it's been even harder for him. And we talked about this with Bo Nix, that he played his best ball game, ironically enough, against Oregon last year, and it's made his expectations skyrocket. And I think Oregon, because of what they had coming back on paper in entering the season, had everyone thinking, wow, this team's going to be phenomenal. And I think that may have gotten into the head of some of the younger players, but they weren't the ones who laid the foundation and made the team have those expectations. And I think that it's hard for Shuck to do what Herbert did, and even in a new offense, which I think Joe Moore has actually simplified it for more so than what Herbert had, and it's made it better for him. He's just unable to make some of the big plays that need to be made to become an elite team.
Absolutely. Turnover differential in this one, 3-0 in favor of Oregon State. Time of possession, 34-26. That's minutes in favor of Oregon State. Oregon State also converted 4 of 6 of their 4th down attempts to go for it there and continue to drive down the field. Yeah, they punched it in on 4th and goal from the goal line with 33 seconds left with I think it's their second string quarterback, because Jebbia actually wasn't able to take that snap. So it was his first carry ever as a Beaver. So he was able to punch in that game for a real statement win for this Oregon State program. And it's disheartening for the Pac-12 to see this happen to their poster child here with Oregon, but also, I think it's going to be a good thing for Oregon to lose in a manner like this, because they were getting a little, like I said, they were chippy, they were cocky, they were a little arrogant coming into this game with Oregon State, and I think it'll humble them a little bit. I think it will allow them to realize that they can't just be in this for the flash, for the show, for all of that, and just because they are Oregon means they're going to win and win these games against people that can beat them. And the Pac-12 is a conference where anything can happen and anyone can beat anyone on any given day. And I guess that's college football in general, but it feels very much more apparent in the Pac-12. So I think this is going to be a good thing for Oregon moving forward. They have to really regroup and move on. I do think they're still the best team in the Pac-12, but talent-wise, but it was very, very interesting to see what happens here. And now we can pretty much eliminate 2 of the 5 power conferences for having a college football playoff berth, which is something that we haven't been able to say, I think, ever in the history of the college football playoff. So it's very, very intriguing what's happening here.
Yeah, for sure. And then just one last thing I wanted to mention is due to this shortened season that we talked about impacts training camps and everything, they're not giving the same chance to remedy this loss. Like in a 9-game conference schedule, Oregon with 1 loss, though it against a Pac-12 North opponent and their rival, it wouldn't impact them. 1, in the playoff ranking as much, and 2, in the Pac-12. They now have to win out to have have it, unless Washington really, really struggles. But like, in a Pac-12 is known for cannibalization, and Pac-12 after dark, that's kind of a joke in the Pac-12 that they take each other out, and that's why the Pac-12's missed out on the title games and stuff like that, because they have 9 conference games, whereas everyone else had 8 for years. And now this year there's only 6, so it's unforgiving. And so this loss is enormous for the Pac-12, for Oregon. And I think it might alert some of the other power teams with a lot of expectations, like, hey, if you lose, your season's over. Um, and yeah, so that was my big takeaway from that game, that the Pac-12 is going to really have to rethink some of the what they're doing as a whole.
Absolutely, and it's really intriguing to build off of something that like what I said earlier is two of the five power conferences are out. You also look at the Big Ten, and that's kind of in question as of right now. We've have news about Ohio State. They're in jeopardy of missing their third game, which would make them ineligible to play for the Big Ten championship game if they're not able to go next weekend. So that would put in a huge complexion as to what happens with the rest of that conference. With Northwestern losing, that chance is pretty much out of making the playoff. Indiana already lost to Ohio State, so they're out. Everyone else is kind of all out of whack. Wisconsin's not even able to play the Big Ten championship game because their game got canceled. So if you look at this Ohio State team, if they're able to go and they're able to play, they're probably going to make the college football playoff because they're probably not going to lose the rest of the way in the Big Ten. But if they're not able to play in the Big Ten championship game and you can't give them that jurisdiction of Big Ten champs, undefeated season, all of that stuff, they're not going to the playoff, in my opinion. And you're going to see a Texas A&M team who's just sitting there at 5, and they've lost to Alabama. They probably won't play in the SEC championship game, but they're going to have a huge say in what's going to happen moving forward, as well as Cincinnati. So it's really interesting to touch on all of this happening, and this loss in the Pac-12 is all but canceling them out of the equation entirely.
I mean, and Florida too. Like you could very easily see Florida beat Alabama, excuse me, and then Clemson beat Notre Dame, and you could have two teams from the ACC and two teams from the SEC if the Big Ten doesn't have a representative because of cancellations for Ohio State games. So that'll be super interesting. But on to the Big Ten, we have an upset to talk about with Northwestern here.
Yeah, I kind of jumped the gun on this one a little bit, so my apologies to everyone out there. But Northwestern did lose this weekend to Michigan State. The final was 29-20 Spartans. They recovered a touchdown in the end zone after a fumble on the whole lateral play with no time left on the clock. So that's a little bit skewed. It was mostly 23-20 for Michigan State there, but that is Northwestern's first loss on the season so far. They had just beaten Wisconsin, like we touched on, to give them the lead in the Big Ten West. So that's a big loss for them to kind of come off of that high, to be brought back down to reality a little bit with that loss there to the Spartans. But like we just touched on, I kind of jumped the gun on all of this. Wisconsin isn't eligible to play in the Big Ten championship game, so Northwestern is still in the lead in the West to be able to make that appearance in the Big Ten championship game in that area of things. So not completely devastating, but it pretty much ruins all hope of them making the college football playoff in this one, in this season so far. And I think it all boils down to Peyton Ramsey for Northwestern in this one. His 2 interceptions were really costly.
Yeah, for sure. And the reason they beat Wisconsin wasn't all their defense. Their defense played a great game in causing some of those interceptions that they forced for Graham Mertz, but Ramsey took care of the ball. And in this game, the script flipped. He struggled and turned the ball over, and Michigan State came out and played spoiler. I think this was we talked about how it could be a potential letdown game after big upset of Wisconsin. But we both thought Pat Fitzgerald would get his troops going and come off and wouldn't be as susceptible as most teams to being upset. But the psychology of an upset in the game after can really play a factor. And I think that Northwestern came out a little bit flat, to be honest, in this game. They struggled early and weren't able to fully recover.
Yeah, a huge part of this game is their trademark is running the football. They only were able to get 63 yards on the ground against Michigan State, and they gave up almost 200 there with 195 for the Spartans. So really interesting to see this Northwestern team beaten in this manner. The score might not have indicated what necessarily happened, but it was very much them unable to run the ball and unable to stop the run against Michigan State, which is very unlike them for their standard and the way they like to play their football games.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, Northwestern, if you were just to think of what you describe them as, I think my first couple words would be stout and always having good linebackers would kind of be like a combination. and they got ran all over. And Wisconsin ran over them in a good portion of the game too, but they were able to force turnovers, and they weren't able to force turnovers in this game, and they were fighting uphill battle due to some turnovers. And then one other thing I thought is, though Rocky Lombardi came in and he didn't play phenomenally, 11 of 27, he provided a presence like running the ball that that added an extra element of dynamism to that Michigan State team that they were lacking when he was out. And I think that made them a whole lot more dangerous. And that's a tough team to play. They're not as good as they had been in the mid 2010s, 2015 when they were competing at the highest level, but they're still a big time program, and you can't sleep on them coming into a game, especially after an upset of Wisconsin. So I think that all but eliminates Northwestern from the playoff contention, as you spoke of.
Absolutely, and Michigan State's well coached. Mel Tucker there is doing a good job so far. It's his first year at the program, so it's very interesting to kind of see what's happening with this Spartan team. I don't necessarily think that they're there yet in terms of where they're at. They definitely played spoiler in this one and showed that they were able to hang with the Big Ten best. But also they have a date lined up with Ohio State if Ohio State's able to go, not this weekend, but the weekend following, I believe. And it's one of those things where they're a team that can sneak up and bite anyone in the foot and say, listen, you're not better than us this week. And so it's gonna be cool to see what happens moving forward with this Michigan State team. And like we touched on, it's pretty much Big Ten championship or is the ceiling as of right now for Northwestern. With that loss, that's probably going to all but eliminate them from the conversation for the college football playoff. So disappointing to see if you're a Northwestern fan, but there's still a lot to play for for the Wildcats in their season thus far, with a chance to compete and play for that Big Ten championship game. So still a lot of hope and a little optimism there for the Wildcats and Pat Fitzgerald moving forward. So that is a big upset in the landmark of college football this year. Once again, that's Michigan State 29-20 over Northwestern there in the Big Ten. So yeah, we've kind of given you a broad overview of where things are looking at right now. So let's continue doing that for our picks so far this year, Leif and I. Leif entered the week with a 2-game lead on me. I went 4-2 though this week, and Leif went 3-3. So I got one back on him. I'm now 28-18 overall, and Leif is 29-17 overall. So I got to keep chipping away, but a big one gathered for me this week.
Yeah, it wasn't the best week for either of us this time, and I was really hoping Dicker, the kicker, could knock that one through. So I was watching. I was like, oh no, he's chipping away. That was my thought process, but it was a tough week. There were some upsets.
Yeah, North Carolina really got my hopes up early, man, with their play, keeping it 14-14. I was like, oh boy, we're going to a shootout.
I'll tell you that.
We're going to a shootout, and North Carolina is able to score. So I was really looking forward to the rest of that one, and then they just kind of disappeared on me on the offensive side of the ball. So I think I need to start adapting the philosophy of picking the favorite in the big games, and maybe be a little less upset minded. But I just for some reason I'm always able to just get behind the underdog.
I tried that early in the season, and it bit me in the butt, and I had to change, and that's kind of how I chipped away and took this lead. I have a feeling that I'm going to make some really silly picks soon. I've been too stringent and taking the big guy, and then it's going to bite me in the butt the opposite way.
How about that big Penn State win over Michigan that I got you on in the Battle of the Bottoms for the Big Ten East?
Jedi mind tricked me or something there. You got me with our document. We put our picks in there, and Scott had first pick this week. I got first pick next week, and I saw his pick, and I was like, man, I'm going to go the opposite on the paper, and then he pulled the opposite on me. It was a wily move, a good veteran quarterback move there, kind of like a fake spike.
Unreal. Penn State able to get their first win on the season. If you haven't heard, they're off the schneid. They're 1-5. So congrats to them moving forward.
James Franklin safe.
Yeah, He also has a $30 million buyout. Did you hear about that? That's
I did
nuts.
not. That makes more sense.
Yeah, he's got a ton of years left on his contract, and for a team to get him, they would have to pay Penn State $30 million. So I think he's probably in Happy Valley for at least a few more years, and there's a little bit more happy in the Valley now. So Penn State's off the schneid 1-5. All right, we touched on we're gonna have a schedule update for the rest of you. Moving forward for the rest of this week, excuse me. Tomorrow, Monday, we're going to put out a basketball preview. It's going to be pretty loaded with some very good games on Tuesday, and then for the rest of the week there, Wednesday we'll look forward to our football news and preview combo. That's probably going to be something that we're adapting for the rest of the way here for football, just because it's able to condense everything. And with basketball and other college sports starting up, we're going to be needing the space in our weekly activities to promote and cover all of that. So we're going to condense football a little bit, because that's not the only thing happening as of now anymore. So that's going to be on Wednesday, the news and preview episode. Friday is going to be probably a little bit shorter of a basketball preview, just for some games over the weekend. Excuse me, I got the hiccups now for some reason. And then Sunday we'll be right back with a football recap of what took place over the weekend. So it's going to be a chock full week again. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday. We'll have stuff out for you. So make sure to look out for all of that.
Yeah, and I mean, basketball one on Monday is going to be heavy. We got the Champions Classic going on Tuesday, and the Jimmy V Classic on Wednesday that we'll be previewing for you guys on Monday. I recommend watching those games, and before you watch those games, listen to our previews. There's going to be a lot of information and probably some bold predictions. I don't know if we'll agree on some of these, because basketball top dogs, you never know early.
Yeah, it's been crazy already with some big upsets and things happening in college basketball. So it's going to be fun to watch moving forward. We got a lot of content for this upcoming week to give all of you, and that'll be it for us this evening on the college on the College Sports Hive. I'm Scott. That's Leif. That's going to do it for this college football recap. We will see you on Monday, and take care, everyone, and stay safe. We'll see you then.
Have a good one.